I'm Dane Rose. Most of reality is unknown, unconscious, invisible, silent. It's not only unknown, it's unknown, meaning we don't even know that we don't know it. It's that far out of view. And one of the things that I've found striking is that throughout my life, many of the things that have been most significant, most relevant to the ultimate quest of sustainable human well-being, weren't taught in school, weren't mentioned by parents, are not part of the cult architecture of memes. So how does one know about them? How does one get a glimmer of all these things that we don't know that we don't know? In 60 Slices of Sanity, I'm going to go through in very rapid formation and touch on some of the things that have meant the most to me, that have affected sustainable well-being the most in my life, in the hopes that it can touch you as well. In the beginning is the whole, is the one, is the integrated ecology. And as one, as a totality, it is unconscious. It is one. And one becomes two as we break the whole apart and create distinction. Now we have the left side and the right side. We have the white and the black. We have the up and the down. As we break the whole into parts, it becomes conscious as we distinguish one part from another. Now, the way that we break the whole into parts, the way that we create consciousness is through language. The English language, the spoken language, the language of mathematics. Mathematics in fractions is again taking the whole and dividing it into parts of equal increments. An inch is just a random symbol, except that it is the same as every other inch. It could just as easily be a pinch or a cinch, as long as the measurements are the same. And of course we have inches, we have meters and centimeters and millimeters. There's lots of different systems. But what's important to understand is that we're not conscious of the vast spaces in between one point and another, one word and another, 1 inch and another. We're conscious of the markers, of the words, of the rhythms and routines that break the whole into parts. Complexity is one of the most important distinctions of consciousness, and it begins with consciousness because everything is either one with no distinctions or has an infinite number of distinctions. And the determiner in the nuance of awareness is the complexity of consciousness. And the beginning of the complexity of consciousness is understanding a wide vocabulary. You can think of color, and if all colors are processed through a filter that is black or white, then if you have a color that is on the darker scale, a darker red, a darker brown, a darker yellow, etc., it will be labeled as black and perceived as black. If you have a color on the lighter scale, lighter pink, lighter red, lighter gray, it will be called white and perceived as white. Now, the entire infinity of the color spectrum is reduced to black and white, not because it doesn't exist, not because a computer cannot refract the color wheel into 246 million colors and counting, but because there isn't the consciousness to perceive it. The same is true in feelings. If you want to be emotionally intelligent, you have to be emotionally literate. If you want to be emotionally literate, you have to be emotionally aware. To be aware, you have to be able to correlate feelings and sensations with words. This leads to consciousness. If you say, I feel slightly sad, and the location is in my solar plexus, now if you put that slightly sad on a 1 to 10 scale and say we've got a 1.5 in sadness located right here, and is it ascending or descending? Is it going into deeper sadness or is it coming into greater light? Is it passing through or is it stuck? Every single distinction leads to more awareness. More awareness equals more consciousness. More consciousness equals more data. More data equals more power. More power equals more freedom. More freedom equals more choice. More choice, more data equals more well-being. More well-being equals more fun. Distinction, refracted through language, is a metric of consciousness, a metric of intelligence. As we move from simpler systems, simpler vocabularies, simpler levels of unconsciousness into nuance, to take the act of drinking wine into 15 different flavors and foretaste and aftertaste and sweetness and this and that and reds, you bring consciousness. And truly so, since we've chosen to bring vast amounts of consciousness in certain sectors to the act of drinking wine, it is the exquisiteness of consciousness that is often far more enjoyable than the liquid itself. All pain is a separation from and a longing for something specific. The longing for wholeness as a physical body becomes painful when a limb is severed and disintegrated from the whole. The refraction of the whole through language, through systems, creates inevitable pain. As you take the infinite sphere, the unending circle, and divide it into good and bad, black and white, up and down, left and right, hotter and cooler, as you divide the one into many, you sever or create the illusion of severing one part of all that is from another part of all that is. And in that illusion of distinction, when the integrated ecology that functions as one appears to us as a bifurcated, boxed-in, truncated, distinct many, there is a longing for wholeness. There is a longing to return. And this creates the inevitability of pain. In order to be successful at creating any result, one must influence the outcome. One must influence the variables that bring about the success. In order to influence something, in order for this hand to influence this hand, it has to attune. It has to adjust itself into relationship with the hand. In order to attune, it must change in relationship. If it's moving along here, there's no attunement. It must change and thus honor what it is attuning to. And in order to honor something, you must see it, you must perceive it, you must respect it, to look and look again. Thus, success begins with perception. Respect leads to honoring, honoring leads to attunement, and attunement leads to success. Every human being in the history of humanity has one thing in common: the innate desire to feel sustainably better, and the chronic fear of feeling chronically worse. This desire shapes at some level every single thing that we do in our environment and is innate to every human being. Now, one of the ways that we move towards feeling sustainably better is to fulfill or meet our human needs. Abraham Maslow outlined a hierarchy of sequential needs that every human being has. The first is to survive. The second is to feel secure. The third is to experience love and belonging. Fourth is self-esteem. Fifth is to develop our unique gifts and strengths. Six is to bring those out abundantly and meaningfully into the world to touch others. And finally is to transcend the limited framework of the isolated egoic self and become a part of something bigger than our limited self. Now, if we ask ourselves, what is mastery? All mastery leads inevitably to success. It is innate to want to succeed at something. If you are succeeding at something, by definition, there is mastery behind that. If you have mastery, by definition, you are succeeding. And one of the things that we succeed at is increasing our freedom and or power. Freedom and power in many ways are synonymous. One cannot be free and be powerful. One cannot be powerful and not free. They go hand in hand. Mastery leads to success. Success leads to freedom. And freedom leads to power. What is feeling sustainably good? Well, there's lots of different things. Feeling good, feeling happy, feeling joyful, feeling relaxed, feeling excited, feeling safe, feeling enjoyment. But one of the things that all of these different directions converge on is fun, conscious fun. When someone has complete and full mastery, when someone controls the variables, the outcomes, the process, one of the things that they always lean towards, instinctively, innately, is fun. And fun, in many ways, sustainable, conscious, masterful fun, in many ways, is the definition, is the goal, is the beacon that we're all moving towards. Now, one of the things in any hierarchy is that most things are for something else. If you think about self-discipline, I need to have more discipline. Why? Who wants to just have discipline? Well, if I have discipline, then I'll get more done. Why? Well, if I get more done, I'll make more money. Why? Well, if I make more money, I'll have more power and freedom. Why? Because I'm in a cult that will give me more power and freedom in exchange for money. They'll let me buy this. They'll let me do this in exchange for money. Why? Well, I want to buy this and I want to do this so that I can feel what? Good. And I want to feel good because feeling good feels good. I want to have fun because feeling fun is fun. You see, at the end of this long sequence of I need this so that I can do this. I need to cut down this tree. Why? So that I can cut it into logs. Why? So that I can chop it into wood. Why? So that I can dry it out over the summer. Why? So that I can go and get this iron. Why? So that I can smelt it into a stove or cast it into a stove. And why? So that I can do this and 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 this. And at the end, there's always feeling good, so that I will be warm, so that I will survive, so that I can live, so that I can thrive, so that I can feel good. Feeling good, conscious, masterful, sustainable fun is at the pinnacle of the value deification hierarchies for all human beings, because it is the only thing that makes sense in its own terms. It's the only self-referential process. I want to have fun because it's fun to have fun. I want to cut down a tree so that I can make wood, so I can do this and this and this and this. One thing leads to another. But I want to have fun because it's fun to have fun. I want to feel good because it feels good to feel good. The reptilian brain is both the oldest brain and it is also the simplest brain. It is the crudest brain, and so it consumes a lot of energy for relatively low yields in well-being. The reptilian brain is designed to keep a body alive and more secure in that aliveness in a sociopathic environment. The reptilian brain is designed to survive in an environment of sociopaths, and its programs are fight, flight, freeze, and fawn or ass licking. And this is the toolkit. Now, when someone is severely traumatized and left in a traumatized state, it is evidence to the biology and to the brain that they are surrounded by sociopaths, because competent empaths would not allow one of their own to stay in a chronic, sociopathic, painful state. The fact that they are staying in a chronic, traumatized state means by definition that either no one in the environment cares or no one in the environment has developed the technology that could have been developed if someone cares. And so the default message of anyone in chronic pain is, I am surrounded by reptiles, therefore I need my reptilian brain. The heart is a scientific instrument, and in the period of limbic development, there are pain and pleasure centers. And pleasure is designed, as a general rule, to take one in a sustainable, healthy direction, to take you in the direction of feeling good. Pain, by contrast, is taking you in the direction of feeling bad. And in one's context of a hierarchy of needs, if one is moving towards dying, one is generally going to feel worse than if one is moving towards life and sustainability. If one's moving towards isolation and shame, one's going to feel worse than if one is moving towards love and belonging. If one is becoming the opposite of what one wants to be, one is going to feel worse. If someone is embodying their ideals and earning self-esteem, in the process, they're going to feel better. So the polarity of negative and positive feedback given to us by the limbic brain, the emotional instinctual centers, are designed to generally move us towards our ultimate goal as human beings of feeling sustainably better. Now, the rational brain is a step up in efficiency and intelligence because it allows us to predict the future more accurately than we could before. When we notice, for example, that every time mom and dad drink 10 beers, there's a fight, and we see that there are 8 empty beer cans, and there's a few more on the table. This pattern correlation allows us to get out of the house before the inevitable calamity occurs. And so, regardless of motivation, regardless of how one feels, the rational brain is intended and serves to help us more accurately predict the future. And with that prediction, take actions that will do what? Help us feel sustainably better to the best of our abilities. Now, the empathic brain, in part, lives in a phenomenon known as mirror neurons, where we turn part of our brain into mimicking the other person so that we can ask that part of our brain how to understand something. Meaning, if I can ask my own brain, what does it feel like to think this and do this and be in this situation? And it says that's a terrible feeling. I'm in that place and it's terrible. Well, then it allows me to empathize and understand you're in that situation 100%. I'm really sorry it's so difficult. The empathic brain allows us to attune to other people, and it allows us to regulate our behavior in a way as to minimize unnecessary impact from our own needs, meaning we need to survive, feel secure, have love and belonging and self-esteem. But through the empathic brain, it lets us do so with a minimum of negative impact on other people. And in doing so, brings together the species a little bit closer. We may not necessarily be friends, but we don't need to be enemies. We're just common individuals moving towards the meeting of our own innate human needs that we've all been given, and which it is all of our jobs to learn to fulfill. Now, in the reptilian brain, we understand that we are separate, that everything is the enemy, that there's fight with things that are smaller than us, there's flight with things that are bigger than us, there's freeze when we're stuck and we can't move either way, and then there's ass licking when we're in a situation where if I do something for you, maybe you'll do something back out of enlightened self-interest. Now, the transcendent brain, which is activated in part through an endogenous compound in the brain called DMT, allows us to have an experience of unity, of oneness with the ecologies of which we are a part. It allows us to touch and become one with, experientially, the whole. Before the brain separated ourselves from that whole with language. And in that experience is the possibility of synergy and collaboration on a mathematical level that transcends anything that we've known or seen as a cult, culture, or species. It offers the opportunity of partnering without hierarchy, of attuning out of empathy and intelligence in a way that the reptilian brain, programmed to respond in a sociopathic environment, cannot achieve, cannot grasp. And because of this, the transcendent brain is ultimately the most intelligent at releasing the possibility field of the species to feel sustainably better and minimize chronic, unnecessary suffering. Now, in science, there's a principle called Occam's razor. And in Occam's razor, you reduce reality down to the simplest possible explanation you could have that would make some degree of sense. And this is good for simple minds. But in reality, reality is as complex as you can possibly imagine it. And we perceive reality through a very small set of observing and measuring devices. Our reality consists of what we can observe and measure. And because we cannot observe and measure what we cannot think, and because we cannot think what we cannot put into words, consciousness, our reality, is the sensory data that we can perceive combined with mental, emotional, imagination, etc., in a way that we can put into language. Because if we can't speak it, we can't be conscious of it. And if we can't be conscious of it, it's not real to us. It doesn't mean it's not real. It's just not real to us. Now, a great way of looking at the 5 physical senses is as technologies of observing and measuring. And I want you to imagine for a moment that you don't have ears. You don't have language for anyone to tell you about ears. And nothing that you've seen has ears. Well, all the sounds that ears hear would still be there to be heard, but they wouldn't be real to us. They wouldn't be part of reality. Now, the same is true with smell. We could remove our ears, we could remove our nose, we could remove the processing centers in the brain for sound and smell, and that bit of reality goes dead as well. We could cut off our nerves at the spine and not feel anything. And we're now moving down. We could cut off our tongue. We could close up our mouth and feed ourselves with a tube and not taste anything. Now the question is, if you couldn't see anything, if you couldn't hear anything, if you couldn't smell anything, taste anything, or touch anything, does that mean that reality, that sound, that sight, that sensation doesn't exist? Now, you would be unconscious of all of it. You might only have imagination. But does it mean it doesn't exist? Now, this leads into the next question, which is, what about a sing? A sing is an observing and measuring device that measures how many right angles are in vision in a given 24-hour period. And it gives you a number, 387, 250, 6,240. That every 24 hours, this sing calculates the right angles that your eyes witness that are symmetrical and gives you a number. And that is now part of your reality. Now, if you had a sing and looked at the data on a daily basis, you could spot trends. You could say, it's interesting, there are more right angles these days than there were 10 years ago. The right angles are getting sloppier than they were last year. It's the same area, but they've seemed to have gotten a little bit askew. Now, here's the thing. That data would be absolutely real. There's not only a sing, there's a bing, there's a king, there's a queen. There are observing and measuring devices for every facet of reality. And we don't know all of them. We haven't created all of them. Scientists discounted the legitimacy of germs until the microscope was invented and they could see them. The point is, reality is not as limited as our 5 little peepholes into all that is. This is just our reality, the stuff that we've made real. Now, everything about it has a probability field. And you probably understand this fairly well. There's a probability that this hand can go like this and go like this. But it also has a possibility field. We're not going to explore the full range of possibility, but these fingers could be severed. They could be severed and dried. They could be pulled unusually far apart. They could be sunk in warm water with salt or vinegar. There's a possibility field that is much bigger than the actuality that's happening, that's much bigger than the probability that could happen. The possibility field is something that we explore with imagination. And it's part of our reality. Because when we think that, whoa, my child could run out of that door when I'm not paying attention and could run into the street and be killed, that thought affects our ability to feel sustainably better. It increases the probability of us feeling chronically worse. The possibility that something could happen to something we care about changes our experience of reality right now. Now, feelings are mathematically generated in the intersection of an instrument called the human heart that merges beliefs, expectations, sensations, memories, and external events and perceptions. These combine to create feelings. The positive feelings that we feel, joy, excitement, etc., tend to correlate with predictions of a future in which we feel sustainably better. The negative feelings tend to correlate and coagulate around patterns that predict a future in which we feel chronically worse. Our feelings are like readings on a thermometer. The colder the environment, we go into negative, below freezing temperatures, below 30 degrees, below 40 degrees. The warmer the environment, the higher the temperature. The response to a feeling is not to tell it, like a thermometer reading, what it should be, but rather to look to understand what part of reality, what part of the future is that feeling revealing to the witness of the conscious mind. Thoughts are simulated reality viewed through the distinction of language. When we understand that a word is a symbol for a part of reality that is denser than the word, a thought is a symbol for the word. To say the word table takes more time and is denser than the thought table. In this way, thought comes into language and into behavior and into reality in a predictable descent, like a plane coming down for landing. And we can understand what's going to be happening on the ground by understanding the same reality at a less dense level of reality. It's very much like the density of drawing something. You want to make your mistakes on paper if you're a carpenter, and utilize your materials and resources in your body well when it comes to making the cuts and placing the nails. Reality is multidimensional in nature. How many dimensions? As many dimensions as we can imagine and observe. If you think about it, sound is a dimension of vibration that is translated through the human ear. If eyes had a wider spectrum of processing data, we could see sound. And in fact, as we translate sound into a visual frequency, we can see sound through electronics. The value of dimensionality, of understanding the full dimensionality of reality and perceiving multiple dimensions, is depth perception. When we look through one eye, we see a certain amount of data. If we close that eye, we see almost the same amount of data, but from a slightly different angle. And as we converge these two angles of perception, we get depth. And the same is true with every other dimension. Each dimension allows us to see a particular portion of reality that is not as clear, not as visible on another dimension. The dimension of geometry and/or mathematics is a particularly useful dimension when breaking out of occult orbit. If we look at Western culture, for example, where we focus most of the development of a Westerner from birth in areas of mind development for the purpose of acquiring capital and things, we can see that if we break out the human experience, which is equal parts feelings, thoughts, and sensations, heart, mind, and body, we can then see that the cult design of Western thought is highly skewed, which results in a less graceful journey. Because if we look at geometry and we see that the sphere, the circle, is the most elegant shape, and we learn from that, then we would develop a cult that educates about the body, about the heart, and about the mind scientifically in equal directions. This leads to a much stronger structure, a much stronger wheel. And so looking at reality mathematically can reveal the blind spots that our cults have masked. Each human being's primary needs are survival, security, love, and belonging. And each of these needs are met far more fruitfully by a cooperative group venture than alone. If we had to invent clothing, invent the internet, invent anything at all that we use in daily life, we would be very hard-pressed starting from zero to do so. The many technologies that pervade our world do so because of the cooperative nature of human beings across time, across generations, in all kinds of ways. This necklace involved the invention of diamond polishing, the invention of mining, the invention of silversmithing, the invention of shipping, the invention of online payments, etc., etc., etc. As a result, the cultural dimension, the dimension of memes through which human beings interact with one another, is one of the primary dimensions that we reference. However, the blind spot of every cult, of every culture, is its self-referential nature. Having decided that we are the people who think this, we are the people who do this, we are the people for whom this is normal, we then go about brainwashing each new infant to adopting these memes blindly, irrespective of their interaction with actual data, with actual science. which tends to point us towards intelligence, the minimum number or a minimum amount of effort or energy required to create the maximum amount of sustainable well-being. The dimension of language is important because words tend to be emphasized in a given culture based on their connection with survival and security, and in more evolved cultures, love and belonging. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. The Eskimos have 400 words for snow because in sub-zero temperatures, knowing the exact type of snow that you're dealing with, is it sleet that's moving towards hail on snow that has frozen, thawed, and is now ice-like? Or is it powder moving to mush? Makes the difference between life or death on a 4-hour sled journey. There are numerous distinctions in consciousness that in our language we have no word for. One of the most common misunderstood words in the English language is love. We don't differentiate between the child's love of attachment, the adolescent love of lust, the young adult love of exploration, and the adult love of nurturing the whole self and then taking that outwards into community. When we understand that words are the limiting factor in what we see, highlight, and experience, we can begin evolving the dimension of language into directions that help us see the things most relevant to human well-being. When we apply dimensions, such as the dimension of capitalism, which is the venture of turning $1 into $2, onto other dimensions, the dimensions of romantic relationship, we can see certain things that may not be visible through the filter that a cult defines as romantic love. We can look at, for example, the return on investment of a given relationship. In this relationship, I invest 6 hours of my life a week and generally feel depressed and miserable. In this relationship over here, I invest 2 hours a week and go away feeling vibrant and alive. In this activity of my life, I invest 6 hours of time and $10,000 in order to pollute the planet and generally feel crummy. In this other area of my life, I invest 5 hours of time. It's free, and I come away more centered and able to show up for my family. When we look through the lens of multiple dimensions on a given object, it can help lead to awareness, which in turn can result in healthier and more intelligent behavior. An identity is a distinct pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, and acting. We can tell someone from another person based on the way that they talk, walk, navigate in a given environment that tends to repeat itself. An identity provides constancy, and editing the template of our identities is our most powerful tool to intelligence, to human evolution, to creating an environment that is conducive to more sustainable well-being. Each identity is a system. We cling to its routine, to its repetition, in part to avoid the fear of the unknown, and boundless chaos. And as a system, the system of thinking, feeling, speaking, and action leads to a given probable yield in a given environment. So in an agricultural environment, planting seeds that are nutritious, watering and tending to those seeds and pulling weeds, etc., yields a certain crop of food. Doing those same practices or attempting to do them in a city does not yield a crop of food. There's no place to plant the seeds. So a given identity paired with a given environment produces a yield, a predictable yield of human well-being, the degree to which someone is facilitated in surviving, feeling secure, developing love and belonging, self-esteem, etc. The art of editing well-being is the art of editing identities. One of the most unfortunate events to emerge in highly traumatic cultures is the clinging to identities that don't work. Meaning this is an identity that is depressed, that is unhappy, that is unregulated and unconscious, and is in this environment producing chronic and unnecessary suffering. This clinging to identities is a clinging to the familiar, to the unknown. And the reason this clinging, rather than a dynamic and healthy change of identities depending on the environment, occurs, is that highly traumatized individuals are terrified of the unknown. The unknown is change. The unknown is anything that isn't me, that isn't familiar. Healing trauma and opening up to a healthy relationship with the rest of reality is often the first step to transforming an identity, a pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, and action that does not work, into a new and healthy identity that leads to sustainable yields of well-being. There's a very close link between trauma and the rigidity of our attachment to identity. And here's a good way to explain it. Most of our initial traumas occur in infancy and childhood. And the combination of cruelty, ignorance, shame, helplessness, and trauma in an environment that did not repair and educate and heal the trauma adequately leads an infant to pray, to fervently commit, to state in no uncertain terms that I will do whatever it takes to never feel this way again. Trauma and helplessness in an incompetent environment is absolutely miserable. And so the attachment to never feeling that way again is natural, is human. Every child, every adolescent in an abuse cult makes that statement. No one's going to ever make me feel this way. I'm never going to be in this situation again. I'm never going to love again. I'm never going to be close. Whatever it is, it's some absolute statement. Now, 99.9% of all reality is unknown. And 99.9% of that reality is unknown, meaning it's so invisible within the observing and measuring devices that we bring to the table that we don't even know that we don't know it, because it's that opaque. Now, how can you, on the one hand, commit to never feeling a certain way, to never re-experiencing something, when one is going into the unknown? You can't. You cannot be humble. You cannot have humility. You cannot set out on an adventure into the unknown. You cannot enter an unknown relationship while simultaneously holding on to the attachment of never feeling certain things, of never having certain experiences. Because the unknown is vast. When one enters the unknown, there is a statistical probability that one will be re-traumatized, shocked, surprised, humiliated, betrayed, abandoned. Because the unknown is much bigger than the known. And it is neutral. The unknown has all of the dreams, all of the beauties, all of the discoveries. You see, 1,000 years from now, when people look back to where we are today, 99.9% of what's most important to someone 1,000 years from now doesn't exist today. Meaning, what does exist today may be seen as very insignificant to the well-being and development and value hierarchy of someone 1,000 years ago. 1,000 years ago, most of what was going on back there is not relevant to today. Netflix, phones, vehicles, proper jobs, the US dollar, clothing by robot and manufacturing loom, shipping containers, gasoline, TVs, electricity. Most of what's relevant to this interaction right here, including our body, didn't exist 1,000 years ago. And most of what is relevant to someone 1,000 years from now doesn't exist today. In other words, the unknown has a tremendous amount of luminous potential. But it also has a tremendously dark potential. Drugged virtual reality enslavement. You know, what's it going to be like when someone can inject a series of electrodes into your brain that make you completely and utterly docile and project a completely different altered version of reality? The nightmare, the trauma, the disease, all of that exists in the unknown as well. The unknown is 99.9% of all reality, and it is going in both directions. New and unknown traumas and destructiveness, new and unknown dreams, technologies, possibilities, and healings. Now, how can one face 99.9% of reality, the majority of who we are, the majority of what the future holds, dark and light, and simultaneously hold to the primary drive? I'm never going to feel this way again. I'm never going to be helpless. I'm never going to let someone be close to me. You can't. And so the clinging is to a known identity, even as it ossifies in the direction of insanity, stupidity, cruelty, and rigidity. So every identity was originally formed out of some sense of intelligence on the intelligence continuum, meaning that habit of thinking, feeling, speaking, and acting led to an increase in sustainable well-being relative to the identity before, relative to the habit before. And presumably it was the best identity available. So when we do not have a willingness to face the unknown, we don't like change because change takes us too close to the unknown. We don't like expansion because 99.9% of all expansion takes us into the unknown. We don't want greater consciousness because 99.9% of all things there are to be conscious about are currently unconscious. So, in this sense, to the degree that someone is traumatized and lacks the technology to heal that trauma, is to the degree that they will have a bottom line of avoiding future trauma. To the degree that one lives in fear and in avoidance of pain and trauma, is to the degree that one will fight with the unknown and fight change. And to the degree that one fights the unknown and fights change, one will increasingly become ossified, insane, irrelevant, and suffer unnecessarily as the pattern of known identity, thought, feeling, action, and words leads to a less and less robust return on investment in sustainable well-being as the environment around us, as the world around us, as the ecology around us rapidly changes, but we fail to adapt in our commitment to avoid the unknown. The basis of all violence, all conflict, all war is attachment to identity. If I'm attached to an identity has borders, has boundaries. If I identify with this body and I identify with the way that I think this body should be treated, then if someone treats this body differently, my body differently than the way that I believe it should be treated, then there is a violation of something that I'm attached to. If I identify with a country or with possessions, and those boundaries are not respected in the way that I believe they should be respected, then there is the basis for a conflict, because all conflict begins when two identities collide. When one person says, this is the way things should be according to who I am, and another person says, no, this is the way they should be according to who I am. This is how this school should be taught. No, this is the way it should be taught. In essence, At the root of all conflict is attachment to identity. The child, adolescent, and young adult love are all self-absorbed. The child or infant has the love of need. I need you. It is the love of attachment with a mother. A child and infant cannot afford to be generous or worried about the needs of the mother. They depend on the mother in order to survive. People in a childlike state of love love by attaching, independent of the wishes or well-being of the other person. The adolescent is similarly in a dimension of significance, needing to feel significant, able to give the act of significance through lust. I want you. I desire you. Again, the adolescent does not think about the needs, preferences, or well-being of the other person. They're quite happy to ruin someone's career in order to have a night of lust because it's about desire, a self-centered desire. The young adult, in their search to find themselves and be free, similarly will latch on to a relationship that offers some opportunity for expression and freedom because of the desire to explore. It's only the adult that is capable of looking at the inner child, the inner adolescent, and young adult in a position of service, to offer to the self, to the infant self, the adolescent self, the young adult self, expressions and opportunities to feel attached, to feel lust, to feel expressed and realized, as this self-fulfillment is realized by the service of the inner parent, of the adult. The self becomes fulfilled and actualized, and is the first person in a position to ask, how can I be loving? And attune the response directly based on the needs and fulfillment of another human being. Adult love begins with the feminine expression of care, but loving enough to care is just the beginning of the bud that is the adult blossoming of love. The next step is caring enough to see. If you care about someone enough, you will pay attention. If you pay enough attention, you will see. The blossoming of seeing is understanding. If you see enough, you will understand another human beings, their uniqueness, their desires, their needs, where they're stuck, and how they can develop. That understanding blossoms naturally into empathy. If you understand anyone enough, whoever they are, you will empathize with their experience. And if you empathize enough with understanding, you will attune. You will adjust your behavior in such a way as to succeed at creating well-being, which begins in the most basic sense of helping another human being self-actualize, to survive, feel secure in that survival, have a sense of love and belonging, develop self-esteem through realizing their ideal of self, to develop their unique and personal gifts, to bring those gifts out into the world in a way that generates abundance, and in that state of abundance to activate the transcendent brain and identify with something bigger than the limited egoic self. In that identification with something more, we have an actualized individual human being. And the actualized individual human being, who has been seen, understood, empathized with, attuned with, supported in becoming their best self in the presence of another, naturally and spontaneously feels gratitude, joy, abundance, pleasure, safety, happiness, which synergistically comes together into the experience of oneness, into the experience of safety, opening up and acknowledging the thread between one distinct individual and another in the formation of something bigger, in the formation of a transcendent love. Love that transcends the self-centeredness of the child, the adolescent, and the young adult, and acknowledges being part of something bigger than self. This is how the virus of adult love spreads from a feeling in one adult into the spontaneous feeling of another adult, and from there out into the world. The faces of love come down to the roles through which love can be expressed. There is the love of a parent towards a child, the love of a teacher towards a student, the love of a student for a teacher, a child for a parent. There is the love of companionship and friendship. There is the love of a lover. There is the love that is joy in the presence, that seeks nothing and needs nothing, but is a simple joy in the presence of another human being. There is the love for the individual, for the group, for the culture, and for the species. There are other faces of love. Each face of love provides an opportunity for a distinct form of exchange at each level, from the self-centeredness of the child to the generosity of a self-actualized adult. The experience of human love is unique, and it follows the path of a love map. One map to love is the templates formed in early infancy and childhood, the template set by the masculine and feminine dynamic of the parents or caregivers. Another map to love is that of ideals and beliefs. For someone who loves beauty, for example, the path to love must navigate beautiful terrains, beautiful locations. There's also the love map of love language. In the book, The 5 Love Languages, acts of service, romantic gifts, words of praise and appreciation, quality time, and touch are 5 primary love languages that, depending on our unique personality and upbringing, one is primary. If the primary love language is quality time, then all other expressions of love must come through that doorway for it to be experienced as love. Each person writes a script, decides what love looks like to them in their language. And in order to realize the experience of love for another human being, it's about touching them in the unique way that they are open to being touched, in the unique way that they have defined the experience of love and are thus consciously looking and open for love to approach in that direction. For you to be fully loved and to experience being loved, it often involves understanding and then revealing this map to another, and then guiding them into that experience, the experience that results in you feeling completely and totally loved. The mathematical superiority of multiple individuals functioning as one in a state of adult love is revealed in the dynamics of lineal math, where 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 equals 4, versus geometric math, where 4 times 4 equals 16. When individuals identify with something bigger than themselves, the third energy, that is the possibility field, positive and negative, between two individuals, this possibility field is much greater than the possibility field of any one individual alone. One can look at this in terms of business adventures, in which 4 people can realize something far greater than the sum of individual 4 people. One can look at this when you see what 4 people can do pushing a car up a hill, when any one person could be there for 100 years and not have the weight to push a larger physical mass. 4 people could do it in an hour, in a matter of minutes, because the combined alliance of multiple energies functioning as one has a synergistic effect. If one looks at the mathematics of intelligence, the phenomena of spending the least amount of energy and effort to create the most amount of sustainable well-being, we see that specializing and focusing as one, bringing our unique talents and gifts in service of a group that is beautiful and true and good. The amount of abundance, the amount of well-being that is created and sustained in that field is exponentially higher than isolated individuals operating with fight, flight, and freeze in a paradigm of fear through the reptilian brain. The reptilian brain that simultaneously allows one to survive in a sociopathic and isolated environment, but also does not allow for the trust and the power of synergies based on adult love. Einstein is famous for saying that the most important question we can ask ourselves is whether or not the universe is a friendly place. And another way of putting that, using the psychological microcosm, macrocosm, fractal model, is whether we, as consciousness, as humans, are basically good or basically bad. Since we project on the other, the unknown, the deity, what we know and believe to be true inside. The template for relationship with reality is the most important template we have, because that template defines the pattern, the expectation, the paradigm, the belief system, the choices, the attitudes between the small part of the self that we identify with as us, as ego, and the large part of the self that is the ecology, that is the environment that gives rise to the small part of the ego. Everything is a relationship between self and other. And 99.99999% of all reality is other. The template we have to relate to that other determines 99999% of our experience of reality. All unexamined templates are imposed, gifted, handed down by the cult and by the family system. This is why childhood abuse and childhood trauma is such a big deal. Trauma has the hottest psychological heat, the biggest psychological footprint of all childhood events. Trauma in many ways molds the default unconscious templates between ourselves and our families, and by extension, the larger universe and world that we're a part of. When that template is one of fear of the unknown, of fear of what is bigger than us, we emerge terrified of the unknown. We emerge terrified of reality that is all around us. And in that mode of fear, based on belief in violation and unlovability, the reality that we create, regardless of how much money or the external circumstance, the reality that we experience is one of scarcity, is one of fear, is one of deprivation. When we understand that 99.9% of all reality is not only unknown, it is unknown, meaning it is so invisible, we don't even know that it's there invisibly because we haven't put language to it. When we understand that the largest portion of reality is the 99.9% that is unknown, then our relationship with the unknown, our relationship with the other, our relationship with the future and with the possibility field becomes the most important relationship with the largest part of ourselves that we can have. One of the most important things to understand about trauma and PTSD is that the biological memories of trauma enter a dissociated, timeless space within the body and the psyche, in which the traumatic event is relived biologically and psychically over and over again in a timeless space that does not mature with time. The beliefs that are consistent with helpless overwhelm and trauma, particularly by a parent towards a child, or a teacher towards a student, or an older sibling to a younger sibling, is that the world is not safe. The belief the world is not safe leads to an avoidance and a defense system between us and the majority of all that is. We cannot embrace and explore the full potential of ourselves as individuals, as nations, or as a species when we are traumatically and instinctively afraid of that possibility field. Healing trauma, preventing trauma, becoming trauma literate, and with it, conscious of the transformation from the fear of the unknown and the regression to the helpless state of the infant and the child, to the confident and mature spiritual adult, becomes the most important pivot point in a civilization, in a species achieving liftoff out of the orbit of terror, trauma, fear, and the reptilian brain into the transcendent state of human possibility, which on our planet, less than 2% in the history of the planet have realized, because we remain in trauma-illiterate cults. Sensitivity, the attunement to the forces and energies in play between one object and another, between one being and another, is the foundation for relationship. The way an adult relates to a newly born infant, the way a large dog relates to a small dog, the way an institution relates to an individual participating in that institution, is either one of gross violation and abuse of scale and mass, or is one of attunement. And this begins by noting distinctions in the neurological map of sensitivity. 10 to 20% of the mammalian population, called humans, are neurologically more sensitive, more reactive, more responsive in very particular ways than the other 80 to 90%. And that has profound impacts for attunement. If you're going to a symphony and one person hears sound 3 times louder than the other person, then what's perfect volume for one is going to be overwhelming for another, and one needs to bring earplugs. Understanding the sensitivity base point in an interaction is the foundation of all loving and well-matched relationships. Every human being exists at some point on the continuum of human needs. Now, if I'm in survival and I'm not sure I'm going to make it through the night as a homeless people among many on American streets, and you're focused on love and belonging, there's a discrepancy in focus. I just need to survive, and you want to experience love and belonging for this part of your psyche. So tracking where each person is on their hierarchy of human needs and interacting in a way that bolsters and supports the other in making progress with where they're at is an important juncture in having a sustainable, healthy relationship with another human being. One of the paradoxes of the sphere, of the wheel, is that it is both one, it is an environment, it is a culture, and as those who work with tissue cultures in labs understand, every culture allows a certain type of organism to grow and starves another organism of food. In other words, there is an optimal culture for every energy pattern to evolve, and there is an optimal culture to destroy or inhibit every energy pattern. And the art of sustainably reproducing healthy human beings is the art of creating a circle, creating a culture that tracks and measures and supports each human being in becoming emotionally literate, becoming mentally intelligent, becoming physically competent, moving through the hierarchy of human needs from survival to transcendence, moving into the relational technologies with the inner world and with the outer world, so that we are experiencing an intelligent statistical probability field where the environment, much like a carefully set up factory, where the cult environment creates the freedom, the intelligence, the care, the empathy necessary for an individual to reliably, gracefully, with a minimum of unnecessary suffering, move from infancy to independence and self-actualization by age 25. Now, in the fractal technology paradigm, there are some core patterns that replicate at larger and larger scales, going up towards infinite, and smaller scales. And it can be helpful in depth perception to look at a pattern of energy from several fractal representations, or from several fractal zoom settings at the same time. And to give an example of that, if you look carefully at a grain of sand, you'll often see the patterns of the beach in the grain of sand. You look carefully at the beach and you'll see the patterns of the larger landscape around. There are these patterns that just recreate in bigger and bigger and bigger levels, much like an atom mirroring, or as a microcosm, the circular orbital rotation of a solar system, or an individual rotating around a family system. Now, when we look at these fractal patterns, we can see that we as an individual are part of the species. We have a distinct part that has emerged at a certain place and time. When we look at the inner world, we can see that our 2-year-old infant self in this setting has a part, developed an identity, a habit of thinking, feeling, speaking, and doing to survive, to feel secure, to meet its human needs in that environment. The technology of parts dialogue is the same whether you're dealing with an individual of 2 different cultures, 2 different parts of the species, or whether you're dealing with a 2-year-old regressed trauma survivor inside with an impatient, arrogant 10-year-old who wants to get on with it and look cool inside, and their inner tension. And parts dialogue begins by understanding that there are thousands of distinct parts within and without. Understanding that each part has the same drives to meet its human needs as a vehicle for feeling sustainably better and avoiding chronic suffering. And that each part worked with the intelligence and resources and opportunities available to it to develop the best strategy that that part could find to feel sustainably better and avoid feeling chronically worse to meet its human needs. When we understand this parts dialogue, we can understand the complex mixed messages that go on within the larger identity we call the present self. As our 2-year-old lobbies for love in this way, our 5-year-old lobbies for love in that way, our 10-year-old tries to avoid love because love has soured too many times, our 15-year-old seeks love in a bottle and sex, our 30-year-old seeks love and abstinence. We can see these complex drives as archaeological layers within the self that can dialogue and share the messages and things that they've learned back and forth across time, across space, with one another, to form the consensus, which is modeled in the larger fractal consensus of a government seeking to integrate all of its many desperate agendas into one bill that becomes the mandate for action and moving forward. One of the things we see through the lens of geometry is the way that as the circle, the one, the totality, is recreated fractally, is recreated through particles. If you tell a computer to build a circle or a sphere, it will use dots and pixels in order to do so. And it will create millions of separate dots. And the human eye will connect those dots and call it one. But it's actually millions of dots. And when you're looking at reality through the lens of the system, through the mathematical lens, no system is complete. A computer can refract the color spectrum to 240 million colors. But that is not all the colors out there. There is an infinite number of distinctions between the lightest green and the darkest green. You can slice it 1 billion, 1 trillion, 1 quadrillion different ways, and you still will not contain all of the space that is between this point and this point. The vastness of reality is in the space between. Even an atom is 99% space. It feels hard because of the vibration, because of the spiraling dance. But it's mostly emptiness and space. And the system tries to move towards that totality, tries to move towards beauty, truth, and goodness by marking portions of that space, by creating masculine demarcations and measurements like milestones along the way. This 1-minute video has just had an explosion of allergic reactions, meaning my body has a conversation. Now the phone has a conversation. All kinds of things in my space have a conversation with this topic that's not there. There's no allergic reaction in any other of these videos, in any of the other moments of my morning. And what's going on here is there's friction in the system. I have a system. And the system was to sit down and write an outline of these videos that seemed circular, that seemed comprehensive, the best things to include in an hour or so video. And each one seemed relatively well weighted. You see, it seemed like this was about the same weight as this, and this is the same importance as this, and about the same time for each, etc. But here's my body saying the system is wrong. The system didn't include a chance to process stuff like this. So this is breaking the mold. You see, and I have a couple of different choices here. A dogmatist will stick to the mold. Will say, look, we can't have phlegm and coughing and stuff on video. That doesn't fit into the model and the system of good presentation. We've got to stay at 1 minute, and so you just cough all you want, and we'll see that as a liability. We'll move that off to the side. And once you're done coughing and going to war with yourself, then you'll come back and you'll do it right, and you'll stay true to the system, the imperfect system that has no place for this explosion of alarm bells that are saying, pay attention more to this, at least for me, than to anything else. And so when we understand that no system is perfect, that the vast amount of reality is the unmeasured space between 2 points, it's not the mathematical configuration of the points, then we have to honor these spaces and things that come true. So, a relationship with the whole divinity, mathematics, to access beauty, truth, and goodness begins by understanding that no matter what the system is, the religious system, the cultural system, the mathematical system, the economic system, that the system is flawed. Not because there's anything wrong with the system, but because systems are flawed by definition. As you take the whole and divide it by 4, you've lost part of the whole. What you've got is the remainder. And that remainder is not whole. So there is a healing journey on the other side of every system. And transcending a system of thinking, a system of language, a system of belief, a system of religion, and a system of culture, transcending those systems, meaning to enter them, to understand them, to develop them, and then move beyond them, is the only way to heal, to return to the oneness of the circle of which we are all a part. Sex is neutral in its impact. It amplifies or accelerates existing patterns, templates, and directions. When there's a healthy, strong, and loving container, a basis, a primary loyalty, and a basis of friendship, sexuality deepens and intensifies the emotions of safety, love, belonging, security, survival. When there is violation, when there is pain, when there is suffering, sex amplifies the isolation, the aloneness, the destruction. In a hedonistic paradigm, the search for heightened physical sensation leads one into the grooves of emotional templates. All sexuality is an interplay between masculine and feminine energy, between assertiveness and receptiveness, initiation and response, point and openness, leadership and allowing. These poles of energy are each 100% equal in participating in the interaction that is sex. And the strongest emotional intensity leads to the greatest physical sensation. The strongest emotional intensity defaults to the parental template of how the male and female, or the masculine figure and feminine figure, interacted. In other words, if in your household the primary and most intense feminine-masculine dynamic was one of the masculine energy violating, raping, overstepping the feminine energy in your house, whether that was done physically, emotionally, or psychologically, then the template that a child builds to empathize with and relate to the environment around them is one in which the feminine knows how to be violated and the masculine knows how to violate. And when that individual pairs up with another human being to reenact the masculine-feminine template at the highest intensity, there will be a tendency to fall into the groove of violation in a way that is evoked and represented by a lot of the BDSM movement. In other words, peak arousal correlates with deep ingrained sexual templates, which correlate to masculine-feminine emotional templates, which correlate to early childhood. This is one reason why the hottest sex may be had with a prostitute or someone that one is in a violation relationship with. And it's one of the reasons it's important to understand that there's a distinction between physical sensation and sensation intensity, and love, and constructiveness, and kindness, and friendship. In the paradigm of nuclear energy, fission is the taking of a whole and cutting it in half and releasing large amounts of energy in the disruption of the atom, and it leaves nuclear waste. Fusion, something that's being developed, is the forming together, is the synergy of a whole that is greater than the sum of its parts. And sexuality functions in similar ways. You can engage in a sexuality of violation that rips portions of the psyche open, tears one part away from the other, releasing huge amounts of sensation and emotional charge. Or one can participate in the deepening, the creation, the co-creation of a third energy, a fusion that is greater than the sum of its parts. The third energy that is born in sexuality is a probability field that is bigger exponentially than the probability field of either individual. And if tended as the highest priority, like a child, something can emerge in that third energy of the relationship that can take both people, that can challenge both people to become more than they were at the beginning of the relationship. At its best, sex is a doorway into the transcendent. Profound sex in a place of love and safety transcends the reptilian brain, the limbic brain, the rational brain, moves through the empathic brain into the transcendent brain, in which endogenous DMT and other chemicals release to provide a profound sacred experience of being one. That not only gives birth to the third energy that is existent between two people, but it can connect and initiate an individual into their spiritual self, the self that is bigger than the ego, the self that transcends the cult into which it was born. This journey of reconnecting to the whole through the archetype of uniting the masculine and feminine as one. Because the whole was, of course, the garden before the knowledge of good and evil, the distinction of language and consciousness, separated the God from the goddess, the black from the white, the up from the down. And in that transcendent moment of alchemically released feelings and psychedelics within the brain, there can be a return to the unity that was before, to the remembrance of what it's like to be a part of something greater than the ego, of what it's like to be part of God, Goddess, all that is. And the opportunity to do that with another human being in this reenactment of this polar dance is one of the most profound expressions of sexuality there is. When we understand that sex is a neutral energy like electricity, we can learn from the science of container. Now, container building is a science one can go cradle to grave in our cult and not learn a single hour about. But if we look at the electrical metaphor, is electricity good or bad? Well, it's about pairing, it's about attunement. If your device can hold 5 volts, then 5 volts of electricity is good. 2 volts, it doesn't charge. 200 volts, it blows up. 5 volts is just the right charge. So with all energy, whether it is constructive or destructive, in part depends on attunement. And the other part is container, which is another way of saying attunement. Is it better to have 10,000 volts or 1 volt? Well, if you're powering a city, you want the 10,000 volts, and you can step it down and divide it and diffuse it in the right ways. But if you're sending 10,000 volts with 200 amps of power down a line, you need a bigger cable. One of the ways that fires or electrical fires happen in houses is when you have too much electricity passing through a narrow container. And the same is true with friendship. Some friendships are very solid and grounded and healthy, and they've got a lot of capacity. They have a strong container, and if you introduce the accelerant, the gasoline of sexuality into that relationship, it will expand into a hot, warm, safe, and dynamic relationship. Other relationships are very thin, and if you put a higher amperage, a higher charge, it falls apart, it heats up, it melts. You smell burning plastic. It distorts. And no one knows in a cult like ours what to do in a situation like that. And so having melted the plastic into a smoked gray substance that smells bad, looks bad, both people kind of walk away because we don't have the science of transformation and container building built into our cult. So the rule of thumb is that sexuality in abstract is beneficial if you have a healthily aligned container that can carry the load and do something useful. Sexuality generates and flows energy. It can be a profoundly creative and generative force leading to new ideas, new identities, new beliefs, new experiences, new habits. The falling in love period with sexuality is an incredibly dynamic and fluid time in which people go well outside their norms and experiment. If the container is solid, with honesty, with friendship, the foundation of friendship is acting in a way that is best for the development and needs of the other person. When doing what's right for the other person in their meeting of their needs of survival, security, love and belonging, self-esteem, developing their gifts, bringing those gifts into the world, finding a connection with something bigger than themselves, blossoming as a human being. When the interactions that support the other in becoming all they can be are the primary interest of the one, you have friendship. And when sexuality can amplify and accelerate that process and has a container, the container in sexuality is time. How many hours a week do you ground the feelings that are induced by the sexuality? How many hours a week do you integrate and understand the feelings through language? How many hours a week do you honor and bow down to the vulnerability of the feelings created by sex? What is the agreement for the container, and is that agreement honored? This is the container for the dynamic and transcendent energy that is sex.